Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The air in the Hall of Iron Skies stank of ozone and alien sweat. Captain Elias Frost adjusted the weight of his combat exosuit, its service humming as he climbed the obsidian steps to the warlord's throne. Around him, the Krithar warriors, hulking, scaled, and armed with plasma axes, snarled at his presence. Their leader, Voreth the Unbroken, lounged on a dais of fused bones, his 4 eyes gleaming like polished coal. Pathetic, Voreth rumbled, his voice vibrating the floor. You hide in metal, human. Are your bones so brittle? Laughter erupted. Elias ignored it. He'd heard this before. The Krithar saw armor as weakness, not wisdom. His fingers brushed the release latch on his chestplate. Armor doesn't make the warrior, Elias said, but it keeps fools alive. Voreth's tail lashed. Remove it. Let us see what flesh dares speak to me. The suit hissed open. Elias stepped out, revealing a body webbed with scars, shrapnel lines from the Battle of Cerulean Ridge, a jagged burn across his ribs from a plasma misfire. The hall fell silent. This, Elias said, tapping a scar over his heart, was a Krithar blade. I walked away. Voreth leaned forward, intrigued. A duel then, my champion against your naked courage. A 7-foot reptilian brute, Gorax, cracked his knuckles. Elias rolled his shoulders. Let's begin. The arena was a sunken pit of blackened stone, its walls carved with the names of warriors who had died screaming. Elias rolled his neck, feeling the weight of every gaze. Krithar warriors perched on jagged balconies, their teeth bared in anticipation. Across from him, Gorax flexed his talons, each one as long as a combat knife. The reptilian champion's scales gleamed under the harsh glow of the overhead lights, his muscles coiled like steel cables. Voreth's voice boomed from above. First blood wins, or first death. Gorax lunged without warning. His strike was a blur, claws aimed for Elias's throat. But Elias had fought worse. He sidestepped, feeling the wind of the swing brush his skin. Before Gorax could recover, Elias drove his elbow into the alien's ribs, right where the scales thinned. A grunt. Gorax staggered but didn't fall. His yellow eyes narrowed, fast for a soft skin. Elias didn't answer. He was already moving, circling, watching. Krithar warriors were strong, but they relied on brute force. They didn't adapt. Gorax attacked again, this time with a sweeping tail strike. Elias ducked, but not fast enough. The impact sent him skidding back, his boots scraping against the rough stone. Pain flared in his side, but he ignored it. He had fought through worse. The crowd roared. They wanted blood. Gorax charged, claws raised for a killing blow. At the last second, Elias dropped low, sweeping his leg out. The move caught Gorax off balance. The massive alien crashed to the ground with a snarl. Elias was on him in an instant, driving a knee into his spine. One hand locked around Gorax's wrist, twisting until the joint groaned. A lesser warrior would have screamed. Gorax only hissed. Yield, Elias said. For a heartbeat, the arena was silent. Then Gorax laughed, a deep guttural sound. You fight well, for prey. With a sudden burst of strength, Gorax twisted free, throwing Elias off. Both warriors regained their footing, breathing hard. Blood trickled from a cut on Gorax's arm. Elias had drawn first blood. The rules were clear. The duel was over. But Voreth's voice cut through the murmurs. Continue. Elias met the warlord's gaze. We had a deal. Deals change. Voreth leaned forward, his grin sharp. Unless you fear your luck won't hold. Gorax wiped the blood from his arm, licking it off his claws. I'm just getting started. Elias exhaled. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But if they wanted a fight, he'd give them one they wouldn't forget. He raised his fists. Then let's finish it. Gorax attacked. This time, Elias didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike, catching the alien's wrist mid-swing. Using Gorax's own momentum, he twisted, flipping the massive warrior onto his back. Before Gorax could react, Elias locked an arm around his throat, cutting off his air. The crowd erupted. Some cheered. Others howled in outrage. Gorax thrashed, his claws raking at Elias's arms, drawing blood. But Elias held on. He had survived worse holds in zero-gravity training. This was nothing. Seconds passed. Gorax's struggles weakened. His eyes rolled back. Elias leaned close, his voice low. "Yield, or this ends you." A choked growl. Then, finally, a nod. Elias released him. Gorax gasped, clutching his throat. The arena was eerily silent. Voreth stood, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he clapped. "A human who fights like a Krithar. I did not think such a thing existed." Elias wiped blood from his lip. "You don't know humans very well." Voreth's grin returned. "Then let's test that." He gestured to the far doors. "Tomorrow, you face the trial of flames. Survive, and you'll earn more than just your life." The crowd murmured. Elias didn't like the sound of that, but he had come too far to back down now. "I'll be ready." The air in the cavernous chamber shimmered with heat before Elias even stepped inside. The trial of flames. Voreth's idea of a fair test. A wide, circular platform stretched before him, suspended over a churning lake of molten rock. The heat was so intense it made his skin prickle, even from the entrance. Across the platform, at the far end, stood a single arched doorway, the exit. Gorax stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. His wounds from the duel had been treated, but his gaze was unreadable. "No armor," he rumbled. "No tools, just your flesh against the fire." Elias rolled his shoulders, feeling the dried blood still caked on his arms from the fight. "And if I refuse?" Gorax smirked. "Then Voreth feeds you to the lava now." "Fair enough." Elias stepped onto the platform. The stone was hot beneath his bare feet, but not yet unbearable. He took a slow breath, eyes scanning the path ahead. The platform wasn't smooth. It was broken into sections, some stable, others crumbling. And between them, jets of flame erupted at random intervals, spewing fire like geysers. Voreth's voice echoed from above, where he watched from an observation ledge. "Cross alive, human, and you will have earned the right to stand among us." Elias didn't answer. He was already moving. The first few steps were easy. Then the ground trembled. A jet of fire exploded to his left, close enough that he felt the searing kiss of heat against his skin. He ducked, rolling forward just as another blast erupted where he'd been standing. The crowd of Krithar warriors above roared, some cheering, others placing bets. Elias ignored them. His focus was on the rhythm, the slight tremors in the stone before each blast, the faint hiss of gas before the flames ignited. He timed his movements, darting between safe spots, his body slick with sweat. Halfway across, the platform shuddered violently. A section of the path ahead collapsed, plunging into the lava below. Elias skidded to a stop, teetering on the edge. The heat was unbearable now, his lungs burning with every breath. Gorax's voice carried across the chamber. "Give up, human. No one will blame you." Elias wiped sweat from his eyes. "I didn't come this far to quit." He backtracked, searching for another route. There, a narrow ledge along the side, barely wide enough for his feet. He pressed himself against the wall, inching forward. The stone scorched his palms, but he clenched his teeth and kept moving. A jet of fire burst directly in front of him. Elias recoiled, nearly losing his balance. His foot slipped. For a heart-stopping second, he hung over the abyss. Then he caught himself, fingers digging into the rock. The crowd gasped. Even Voreth leaned forward. Elias pulled himself up, muscles screaming. He was close now, just a few more steps. Then the final trap triggered. The entire platform ahead of him erupted in a wall of fire, cutting off the exit. Elias staggered back, shielding his face. There was no way through. Voreth laughed. A shame. I was starting to like you. Elias's mind raced. There had to be a way. His eyes darted to the ceiling. Thick chains hung from above, remnants of some ancient mining rig. If he could reach one. He jumped. His fingers closed around a chain just as the platform beneath him gave way. The metal burned, but he held on, swinging himself toward the exit. The wall of fire roared beneath him, close enough to singe his clothes. Then he was past it, landing hard on the other side. Silence. Then, slowly, applause. Voreth stood, his expression one of grudging respect. Impressive. He gestured to the exit. You have earned your place, human. But tomorrow, we see if your people are worth sparing. Elias met his gaze. They are. Voreth's smile was cold. Prove it. The scent of charred meat and oil hung thick in the war hall as Elias entered, his body still raw from the trial of flames. The Crithar warriors parted before him now, their earlier jeers replaced with wary silence. At the far end of the chamber, Voreth lounged upon his bone throne, one clawed hand idly stroking the skull of some long-dead enemy. You survived, the warlord rumbled, not sounding particularly surprised. But survival alone does not win wars. Elias stopped before the dais, ignoring the pain radiating from his burns. What do you want? Voreth leaned forward, his 4 eyes gleaming. Your people fight well, for weaklings, but they lose. Always. He gestured to a holographic display that flickered to life beside him, showing human colonies burning under Crithar assault. Join me. Command a legion. Your warriors under my banner. The offer hung in the air like poisoned gas. Around them, the Crithar elite murmured, some nodding approval, others baring teeth at the insult of a human standing among them. Elias studied the hologram, the burning cities, the fleeing civilians. His jaw tightened. And if I refuse? Voreth's smile showed too many teeth. Then the next colony we glass will be your homeworld. The threat was expected. The choice was not. Elias exhaled slowly, weighing options he didn't have. Then he raised his head. I'll join you, he said, watching Voreth's eyes light with triumph. On one condition. The warlord's tail twitched. Speak. Release the human prisoners first. All of them. Silence. Then laughter, deep, rolling guffaws from the Crithar warriors. Voreth joined in, shaking his massive head. You bargain with nothing, human. Elias didn't blink. You want my loyalty. Prove yours. The laughter died. Voreth's expression darkened. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of starship engines beyond the hall. Then, done. Voreth waved a clawed hand. Corax. Have the slaves gathered in the docking bay. He turned back to Elias, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. But know this, if you betray me, I will peel the flesh from your world inch by inch. Elias met his gaze. Understood. The docking bay stank of fear and antiseptic. Hundreds of human prisoners stood shackled in rows, their faces gaunt, their uniforms tattered. When Elias entered, their eyes widened, some with hope, others with suspicion. A familiar voice cut through the murmurs. Captain. Elias turned to see Lieutenant Rinveld, his second in command from the fallen cruiser Dauntless, her left arm bandaged where a Crithar blade had taken 2 fingers. She limped forward, disbelief warring with anger. You're working for them now. He gripped her shoulder, his voice too low for the guards to hear. Get these people to the transports. Don't stop for anything. Her eyes narrowed in understanding. What about you? A shadow fell across them. Gorax loomed, his massive arms crossed. Time's up, human. Voreth waits. Elias squeezed Rin's shoulder once before releasing her. Go. As the prisoners were herded toward the waiting ships, Elias watched them go, memorizing faces. Then he turned and followed Gorax back into the depths of the warlord's stronghold, his hands curling into fists. Voreth thought this was a surrender. It was a declaration of war. The command center of Voreth's flagship pulsed with crimson light, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning circuits and alien sweat. Elias stood at the tactical display, surrounded by Krithar officers who still eyed him with barely concealed disdain. On the screen, the last of the human transports blinked out of sensor range, jumping to safety. Voreth's claw tapped impatiently against the armrest of his command throne. Your people are free. Now fulfill your oath, human. Elias studied the star map, noting the positions of every Krithar warship in the sector. He'd spent the last 6 hours memorizing patrol routes, security codes, and most importantly, the location of the flagship's main reactor. Of course, he said, turning to face the warlord. But first, tell me something. Voreth's nostrils flared. What? Why do you hate humans so much? The question caught the warlord off guard. He leaned back, his tail flicking in irritation. You are weak. You rely on machines, on tricks. You have no honor. Elias nodded slowly. I see. He tapped a command into the console beside him. Then let me show you what our tricks can do. Alarms shrieked through the ship. The lights flickered as emergency protocols activated. On the view screen, the other Krithar vessels suddenly veered off course, their engines misfiring. Voreth surged to his feet. What is this? A virus, Elias said calmly. Uploaded to your systems the moment you brought me aboard. It's shutting down your weapons, scrambling your comms. He tapped his temple. Human ingenuity. The warlord roared, drawing his plasma blade. I will carve your heart from your chest. Elias didn't flinch. You're welcome to try. Chaos erupted. Krithar warriors lunged for him, but Elias was already moving. He snatched a sidearm from a stunned officer, firing 3 precise shots into the control panel beside Voreth's throne. The containment field around the ship's antimatter core flickered, then failed. The deck plates trembled as the reactor went critical. Gorax appeared at Elias's side, his massive form blocking the exit. For a heartbeat, they locked eyes. Then the reptilian warrior grinned. I always hated that bastard. He tossed Elias an emergency breather. Docking bay. Now. They ran as the ship tore itself apart behind them. The escape pod jettisoned just as the flagship's reactor detonated, the shockwave sending them spinning through the debris field. Through the viewport, Elias watched the remains of Voreth's fleet scatter like embers in the wind. Gorax adjusted their course toward the human rendezvous point. Your people will accept me. Elias leaned back, exhaustion finally catching up to him. If they don't, I'll vouch for you. The Krithar grunted. Good, because someone needs to teach you soft skins how to fight properly. As the pod drifted toward the waiting human fleet, Elias allowed himself a small smile. They'd won today. But the real war was just beginning.